And the garden could look pretty roughish, you know, over the years. In the 1980s, it had its shabbinesses, undoubtedly, and people used to say, yeah, like Sissinghurst, oh, Sissinghurst, but go to Dixter, it's got soul. And like that or not. No labels in the nursery really either. And always, you know, a good number of better looking than usual young men helping run the garden. So everybody was terribly prurient about Dixter. And so when Christo asked me to write this book, it was something I hadn't considered. And I was greatly flattered, I have to say. And he died a month later, which I hope is no reflection on me, but it changed the book enormously, as you would imagine. You know, there was greater freedom, and I was missing what ought to have been my main source of information. Well, I have never felt mentally or physically grubbier, more sordid than I did going through that house full of furniture, full of 100 years papers that were never thrown away. And when I say papers, I mean mostly letters, some diaries, yes, but mostly letters between that family. And there were lots of them. And as I said, you know, there will, well, I haven't said, I must say, there will never be, I suspect, a garden as comprehensively written about, ever. Because he spent, starting writing in the 50s, you know, he spent 60 years writing about the detail and what happened in it himself, in a kind of way that's sufficiently well written as to last in itself. And it was televised, and other people wrote about it, and the whole business. It was photographed. All the great, famous garden photographers of the last 40 years went there often. It's the most documented garden on earth. And so it's not going to disappear, but what might, and what with the gap I wanted to fill, was the man himself. So I make no bones about this not being a gardening book. It's about him and how he wrote and his influence on gardens. You know, he didn't change the world except in how he influenced gardens. But goodness, that's a very pervasive influence in England. So I wanted to look at whether he was lonely, rattling around in this house, and to what extent he really was generous, and to what extent he really was rude and misogynistic. And one thing was very clear, that he was absolutely driven, incredibly energetic, vigorous man, right to the end. And I had in mind to call this book Christopher Lloyd, 2 Lives, for a very simple reason, 2 simple reasons, that the lifespan of that garden, house and garden, encompassed his life, and vice versa. But he had, in his early years there, 2 lives. The place was run by 2 lives, which was Christo and his mother Daisy. And when she died, by which time he was 51, his life changed completely. Got rid of the old horror at last. And it was a bit late, you know? It was a bit late to have anything like the life he might have had in those first 51 years. And so the book is a bit about making something of a second life, and coping with that kind of sudden change. Well, Daisy Lloyd. I think it was not uncommon, you know, in the early years of the 20th century for young ladies to marry older men of substance and suddenly find themselves chatelaine of a substantial chunk of real estate and having to run it. In her case it was different because they made their house together, but he was 13 years older than her, Nathaniel Lloyd, when they married, and Dixter, which they got Lutyens to make for them, this beautiful house, two 15th century houses sandwiched together with a big cream filling of Lutyens, was their project. An extraordinary piece of work. And for her, making that house sing, making it a family home, making it something she could be proud of, was everything to her in life. That was 1956 in the snows. And I love it because that house is all about roofscape. You know, no painted plaster inside, bare wood, bare floors, wonderfully simple, almost warm.